It's a question that haunts the quiet corners of our lives. When does something old become obsolete? When does the guardian become the burden? For one farmer, Elias, that question wasn't philosophical. It was a 2-0-pound reality standing in his field. A creature named Orion who had seen 17 summers fade. The world saw an old bull, past his prime, a relic of a bygone era. Elias saw a friend, but on one fateful evening, with a storm brewing on the horizon, and a fence lying broken, he made a choice. He led Orion to the far pasture, a place he believed was safe, a temporary solution. He didn't know he was leading his old friend not to safety, but to an ambush. He was setting the stage for a legend, written in blood and bravery, under the cold, unblinking eyes of 10 hungry predators. Orion stood alone as the sky began to weep. The first drops of rain were cold and heavy, tapping a somber rhythm on his broad, weathered back. He was a creature of immense patience, a living mountain carved from time and stillness. His world had shrunk from sprawling championships and the admiring gasps of crowds to this quiet patch of green earth. His joints ached with the memory of colder winters, and his vision was softer at the edges, but his senses remained sharp, honed by years of silent observation. He could smell the ozone in the air, a metallic tang that promised a violent storm. He could feel the barometric pressure dropping in his bones, a deep internal ache that was more reliable than any weather forecast. The wind, which had been a playful whisper all afternoon, began to gather its voice, howling through the gaps in the old stone walls that bordered the pasture. Elias had called this place the sanctuary field. It was remote, protected on 3 sides by dense woods and the rising slope of a hill. It was supposed to be a haven. But as darkness swallowed the last bruised streaks of twilight, Orion knew that sanctuaries could become traps. He wasn't afraid. Fear was a frantic energy he could no longer afford to spend. Instead, a profound and ancient stillness settled over him. He planted his hooves deliberately into the softening earth, anchoring himself. He was no longer just standing in a field. He was occupying a position, his heavy head lowered slightly, the great horns that had once been his vanity, now feeling like familiar weights, extensions of his will. He listened past the rising symphony of the storm, past the drumming rain and the groaning trees. He listened for the other sound, the sound of the hungry dark, and it came, a faint, almost imperceptible rustle in the undergrowth. Then another. It was a sound he knew not from experience, but from instinct, a ghost story whispered in his bloodline for 1,000 generations. The coyotes were here. The pack did not emerge from the woods in a rush of fury. They were smarter than that. They were masters of psychological warfare, specters made of shadow and patience. They materialized at the edge of the tree line, one by one, their forms barely distinguishable from the churning dark. They were lean, sinewy hunters, their eyes glowing like scattered embers in the gloom. 10 of them, a large pack, emboldened by hunger and the cover of the raging storm. At their head was a larger male, the alpha. He was scarred and cunning, a veteran of countless hunts. He saw not a formidable bull, but an easy meal, old, slow, isolated, the perfect victim. The pack fanned out, their movements fluid and coordinated, a silent, creeping crescent of death tightening around the lone figure in the center of the field. They didn't howl, not yet. The silence was their weapon. They wanted him to panic, to run blindly into the night where they could hamstring him, exhaust him, and tear him down. They began to circle, a slow, predatory dance in the driving rain. Their paws made no sound on the wet grass. They were a closing net of teeth and claws. But Orion did not move. He didn't even turn his head to follow them. He stood as still as the ancient stones in the wall, his massive form a focal point of absolute calm in the swirling chaos. He let them circle. He let them draw their invisible lines. He was listening, feeling the vibration of their steps through the ground, mapping their positions in his mind. He wasn't waiting to be attacked. He was choosing his battlefield. With a slow, deliberate pivot, he backed himself toward a small, dense thicket of hawthorn bushes at his rear. The thorny branches would protect his vulnerable flank. He was forcing them to face him head-on. He was taking away their greatest advantage, the element of surprise from behind. The alpha coyote stopped, tilting its head. This was unexpected. The old bull wasn't panicking. He was thinking. The standoff felt like an eternity, a frozen moment between the lightning flashes. The rain fell in blinding sheets, plastering Orion's thick coat to his skin, washing over his scarred hide. The coyotes, a ring of yellow eyes, grew bolder. The alpha gave a short, sharp bark, a signal that sliced through the roar of the wind. It was the command to begin the test. A younger, more reckless coyote darted forward, a blur of gray fur. It was a feint, a probe to gauge the bull's reaction time. It snapped at the air just inches from Orion's nose, its teeth clicking like stones. Orion didn't flinch. He didn't waste a single calorie of energy on the bluff. He simply held his ground, his gaze unwavering. The air around him seemed to thicken with a palpable sense of resolve. Another coyote tried from the left, lunging and retreating in a heartbeat. Still, nothing. They were trying to unravel him, to find a loose thread of fear they could pull. But Orion was a tapestry woven from patience. He had outlasted droughts, blizzards, and the slow decay of his own body. He would outlast this. The alpha, growing impatient, decided to escalate. It let out a long, piercing howl that was joined by the rest of the pack. A chilling, multi-toned cry that was designed to shatter the nerve of any prey. The sound clawed at the night, a promise of a violent, drawn-out end. It was the sound of the wild reclaiming its own, but inside Orion's mind, the howling was just noise. He was focused on something else, a memory perhaps, of a time when he was young and full of fire, the roar of a crowd his symphony. Or maybe a simpler memory, the gentle hand of Elias's young daughter, offering him an apple, her touch so small against his immense head. He was not just an animal cornered in a field, he was a guardian. He was a king in his own forgotten kingdom. The alpha, seeing its psychological tactics failing, gave the true order. The time for games was over. Two coyotes broke from the circle simultaneously, attacking from opposite sides. This was the classic pincer movement, designed to divide his attention and create an opening. The one on the right went low, aiming for his leg. The one on the left leaped high, aiming for his neck. The night exploded into motion. The illusion of a slow, decrepit animal shattered in an instant of violent grace. As the two coyotes lunged, Orion moved with a speed that defied his age and size. He did not turn to meet them both. He ignored the one going for his neck, trusting the thick muscle and hide there to protect him. Instead, he dropped his head and pivoted on his front hoof, a move of surprising agility. His left horn, a sharpened scythe of bone, caught the low-attacking coyote in the ribs. It wasn't a wild swing. It was a precise, calculated thrust, powered by 1,000 pounds of focused momentum. There was a sickening crunch and a yelp that was cut short as the predator was thrown sideways into the mud, its body limp. Orion didn't pause to admire his work. In the same fluid motion, he swung his massive head back the other way. The second coyote, still airborne, landed on his back, its claws scrabbling for purchase. Orion bucked, not wildly, but with a controlled, bone-jarring heave that sent the animal flying over his head. It landed hard, stunned and winded, and scrambled back toward the safety of the pack, its confidence broken. A stunned silence fell over the remaining coyotes. Their eyes, which had glowed with hungry confidence, now held a flicker of something else: shock, respect, fear. The old bull was not an easy meal. He was a warrior. He had dispatched one of their own and repelled another in less than 3 seconds. The alpha growled, a low rumble of fury and frustration. This changed the equation. A quick, low-risk hunt had just become a costly battle, but there was no turning back. The scent of blood was in the air now, their own blood, and it drove them to a different kind of frenzy. This was no longer just about hunger, it was about pride. The pack regrouped, their movements more cautious now, more deliberate. They began to circle again, but this time, the dance was different. It was a siege, and Orion, breathing heavily now, the first warmth of adrenaline singing in his veins, settled back into his defensive stance. He had won the first exchange. But he knew the night was long, and his enemies were many. Have you ever felt so completely outnumbered that the only sensible thing to do was give up, pinned by circumstance, surrounded by challenges that seemed to have no end? It's in those moments that we discover what we're truly made of. Orion was living that moment. He stood his ground, a lone bastion against a tide of predators. The battle settled into a grueling rhythm, a deadly ebb and flow. The Coyotes attacked in waves, 2 or 3 at a time, testing his defenses from every angle. They were relentless, a flurry of snapping jaws and raking claws. But Orion had become a master of conservation. He did not waste a single movement. Every step was a strategic adjustment. Every swing of his head was a purposeful blow. He used the thorny thicket at his back like a trusted ally, forcing the fight to stay in front of him. He became a fortress of horn and hoof. A deep gash opened on his shoulder, warm blood mixing with the cold rain. Another bite caught his hind leg, sending a sharp, fiery pain up his flank. He grunted, a sound of pure exertion, but he did not yield. He was fighting a war on 2 fronts, one against the predators outside, and one against the creeping exhaustion within. His ancient muscles screamed in protest. His lungs burned. With every passing minute, his movements became a fraction slower, his reactions a hair less sharp. The alpha coyote saw it. It was the moment he had been waiting for. The old bull was tiring. The pack leader, who had held back until now, directing the assault from a distance, decided it was time to enter the fray. It was a magnificent animal in its own right, larger and more powerful than the others. It moved with a chilling confidence, its eyes locked onto Orion's. The other coyotes seemed to sense the shift. They fell back, creating an arena for their leader. The storm raged, lightning illuminating the scene in stark, dramatic flashes. The wounded, weary bull, and the fresh, determined alpha. The final act was about to begin. The alpha didn't rush in. It stalked forward slowly, circling, looking for the perfect opening. Orion watched it, his breath coming in ragged heaves. He knew this was the true test. This was the mind he had to defeat, not just the body. The alpha lunged. It was faster than the others. Its attack a low, brutal charge aimed at Orion's wounded front leg. Orion tried to pivot, but his exhausted body responded a second too late. The coyote's teeth sank into his flesh, and a wave of agony shot through him. He roared, a sound of pure fury and pain, and kicked out with his hind legs, but the alpha was agile, disengaging and dancing back out of reach before he could connect. It had drawn first blood in their personal duel. It circled again, content to let the wound weaken the great bull. Orion stumbled, his leg threatening to buckle. For a fleeting moment, the darkness at the edge of his vision swam closer. This was it. The end of the long road. His strength was failing. The pain was immense. The cold was seeping into his bones. He could just lie down, let the earth take him. It would be so easy. But then, something flickered deep within him. Not a thought, not a memory, but a feeling. The feeling of sun on his back. The taste of sweet clover. The sound of a little girl's laughter. The feeling of Elias's hand scratching that one spot behind his ears he could never reach. It was the sum of his life, not of his titles or his victories, but of his connections. He was not just meat. He was Orion, and he was not done yet. With a great, shuddering breath, he found a new well of strength, one buried deeper than muscle and bone. It was the strength of spirit. He straightened up, ignoring the fire in his leg. He looked at the alpha, and for the first time that night, he let out a bellow of his own. It was not a roar of pain or fury. It was a declaration, a challenge. The sound rolled across the field, momentarily silencing the storm. Then he did something the alpha could never have anticipated. He charged. It wasn't a blind, desperate rush. It was a focused, all-or-nothing assault. He lowered his head, aiming his horns like twin spears, and drove himself forward with every last ounce of power he possessed. The alpha was taken completely by surprise. It had expected a slow, agonizing decline, not a final, glorious offensive. The sheer, unexpected ferocity of the charge broke its composure. It tried to dodge, but Orion was a living avalanche. He wasn't aiming for a killing blow. His strategy was simpler and far more brilliant. He was aiming to break their will. He smashed through the center of the pack's formation, a force of nature unleashed. He didn't swerve or turn. He just plowed forward, his immense weight and momentum scattering the coyotes like leaves in a gale. He wasn't just fighting them anymore. He was dominating them, reclaiming his space, his dignity. He drove the alpha backward, forcing the cunning leader into a panicked retreat. He chased the fear, not the animal. He ran them, hounding them back toward the tree line from which they had emerged. The hunters had become the hunted. He stopped at the edge of the woods, his sides heaving, his body a canvas of wounds. He watched as the pack, disorganized and demoralized, melted back into the darkness. Their leader paused for a moment at the tree line, turning to look back. In its eyes, there was no longer hunger, only a profound and bewildered respect. Then, it too was gone. The field was silent, save for the sound of the wind and rain, and Orion's own labored breathing. He had not killed them all, but he had defeated them. He had won. The battle was over, but the longest night of his life had just begun. He turned slowly, his wounded leg protesting with every step, and walked back to the center of the field. He stood over the body of the one he had fallen, not in triumph, but in a grim, solemn vigil. He was alone again, but he was the master of his domain. He simply stood, a dark silhouette against the storm, and waited for the dawn. Back at the farmhouse, Elias couldn't sleep. The storm rattled the windows, each gust of wind sounding like an accusation. He paced the worn wooden floors of his kitchen, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hand. Every crash of thunder made him jump. He told himself Orion was fine. The sanctuary field was secure. It had high ground, some cover. An old bull that size? Nothing would bother him. But the rationalizations felt hollow, thin excuses against a rising tide of guilt. He thought of Orion's eyes when he had led him there, the deep, trusting gaze. Elias had looked away. He had been so focused on the logistics, the broken fence, the cost of repairs, the approaching deadline for a shipment, that he had treated his old friend like a problem to be managed. He had chosen convenience over care. "He'll be fine for one night," he had said to his wife, his voice betraying more hope than certainty. Now, the words mocked him. The image of the old bull, standing alone in the dark, was seared into his mind. He was more than livestock. Orion had been with the family since Elias's father ran the farm. He had watched Elias's own daughter grow up, patiently enduring her clumsy attempts to braid flowers into his forelock. He was part of their story, and Elias had left him out in the storm. As the first faint light of dawn began to bleed through the clouds, the guilt became unbearable. He couldn't wait any longer. Pulling on his boots and a heavy rain slicker, he headed out into the muddy, storm-ravaged world. The air was clean and cold, washed by the rain. The world felt new and fragile. He dreaded what he might find. His heart pounded a heavy, fearful rhythm against his ribs with every step he took toward the far pasture. He imagined the scene, a grim tableau of what the wild does to the weak. He braced himself for tragedy. He was preparing to mourn. The walk to the sanctuary field felt like a mile-long funeral procession. The ground sucked at his boots, trying to hold him back. When he finally reached the crest of the hill overlooking the pasture, he stopped, his breath catching in his throat. He squinted, trying to make sense of the scene below. The ground was torn up, a mess of mud and flattened grass, telling a story of a violent struggle. He saw a dark shape on the ground, a coyote. His blood ran cold. Then he saw another shape, a much larger one, standing near the center of the field. It was Orion, but he wasn't moving. Elias's heart plummeted. He started running, slipping and sliding down the slick embankment, his mind screaming a silent prayer. "Please, no. Please be okay." As he got closer, the reality of the situation began to resolve itself with terrifying clarity. He saw another dead coyote near the hawthorn bushes. The ground was littered with signs of a desperate, prolonged battle. And there, in the middle of it all, stood Orion. He wasn't just standing, he was standing guard. He was covered in mud and blood. A deep gash marred his powerful shoulder, and his flank was crisscrossed with smaller cuts. He was favoring one leg, his great body trembling with exhaustion. But his head was up. His eyes were clear, and he was alive. Elias slowed to a walk, his run turning into a stunned, reverent approach. He stopped a few feet away, unable to process what he was seeing. 10 coyotes, the villagers had always said, was a hunting party that could bring down a young moose. And Orion, old arthritic Orion, had faced them alone. And he had won. Tears welled in Elias's eyes, hot and shameful. They weren't tears of relief, not yet. They were tears of awe and of profound regret. He had seen an old bull, a liability. The wild had seen a king. Orion, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The bull turned his massive head slowly, and his eyes met Elias's. There was no accusation in them, only a deep, quiet knowing. In that moment, the farmer didn't see an animal. He saw a hero. He saw the friend he had almost failed. The story spread through the small, rural community like wildfire. It started with Elias's choked phone call to the local veterinarian, Doc Jensen. "You need to come out here," Elias had said, his voice cracking. "It's Orion. You won't believe it." When Doc Jensen arrived, a man who had seen everything in his 40 years of practice, he could only stand at the pasture's edge and shake his head in disbelief. He carefully cleaned and stitched Orion's wounds, his movements gentle and full of a newfound respect. "I've seen pack attacks before, Elias," the old vet said, his voice hushed. "I've never seen this. Never. The fight he must have put up, it's the stuff of legends." The skeptical young farmhand, a boy named Leo, who had often joked about putting the old-timer out to pasture for good, was humbled into silence. He helped Elias repair the main fence with a quiet, focused energy, occasionally glancing over at the recovering bull with an expression of pure reverence. The story transformed Orion. He was no longer the old bull at the edge of the farm. He became its heart. He was a living monument to a strength that doesn't fade with age but deepens, settling into the bones like wisdom. He was a reminder that the greatest battles are often fought in the dark, unwitnessed, and that courage is not the absence of weakness, but the will to stand when everything tells you to fall. In the weeks that followed, Orion healed. His wounds became scars, silver lines that told the tale of his incredible night. But something else had changed. He carried himself differently. There was a renewed majesty in his posture. He would stand at the fence line, looking out over the valley, no longer just an old bull, but a guardian watching over his kingdom. Elias would often bring his daughter out to see him, and she would hold out an apple, just as before. But now, when Elias watched them, he didn't see a pet, he saw a protector. The old bull, the burden, the relic, had saved himself, and in doing so, he had redeemed the man who had doubted him. As the sun set, casting a golden light across the fields, Orion would stand, a powerful silhouette against the dying day, a symbol of the unbreakable spirit that resides in the quietest, most underestimated souls.